And welcome back to another edition of Leetcode Problems with Java. Today we have a new and really fun problem. This problem that we have today is called Destination City. Okay, so let's look through the description for this problem because this is a really fun one. So, Destination City. You are given the array paths where paths I equals city AI, city BI. Means there exists a direct path going from city AI to city BI. Return the destination city. That is, the city without any path outgoing to another city. So we have to find the final destination here out of this itinerary. It is guaranteed that the graph of points forms a line without any loop. Therefore, there will be exactly one destination city finally. So we don't have to worry about it coming back together and giving us, you fly to London, for example, and then we fly back to the United States. We're not going to have to worry about that. We're going to go from point A to point B, and then B is the point that we're trying to figure out what B is. So looking at example 1, we have input paths. So these are remember, it can go in different orders as long as we know though there's only one final destination. So looking at this, they can go from London City to go to Sao Paulo. Oh, and you'll end up in Sao Paulo. And we can see because it consists of going from London, which is your outgoing flight. Incoming flight's going to be New York. Outgoing flight's going to be New York to Lima, incoming flight. Outgoing flight in Lima to incoming flight in Sao Paulo. And you can see Sao Paulo does not have a departure flight. It only has an incoming flight or an arrivals flight. And so we can already figure out, okay, there's some logic that we're going to have to think about in our solution here. We want to find the city that has an arrival but does not have a departure. So that's something we need to think about right now. Okay, example 2. So here's another example. So going from city B to city C, city D to city B, city C to city A. And looking at this, our explanation is going to be, our final output is going to be A, once again because A is the only match here that has an outgoing or an incoming but not an outgoing. You'll see D has an outgoing but no incoming. So we start at D, go to B, and then B to C, and then finally C to A. Okay, so there are several possible trips here, of course, is that you could go D, B, C, A. You could even just go B, C, A. You don't have to use this middle guy. Or you could just go C, A, this final guy over here. Or A. Clearly the destination city is A because all roads lead to there. Okay, example 3. If you have the outgoing city is A, your incoming city is Z, it's going to be Z. Okay, and we can actually take that example and use a lot of our logic around that. So, and then expand out for these bigger examples. So constraints here, we know that the paths, so this multi-dimensional list that we're dealing with here, you see how this is a multi-dimensional list in that we have a list inside of a list. So this list has 3 different elements. Each element has 2 elements within it. So we have to recognize that we're working with multi-dimensional lists here, and we're gonna have to kind of do some new syntax that we haven't worked with in our previous videos in order to pull the information that we need from this multi-dimensional list. Okay, so constraints, so that list is going to be less than 100 size and greater than 1. The length of the inner of all these inner lists, so we have our whole list here would be length 3. There's 1, 2, 3 elements. But our inner lists here, so each ith element is going to have a length of 2. So you can see each of these has a length of 2. So city AI dot length and city BI dot length. Okay, so basically we're not gonna have any of these less than 1 or greater than 10. And city AI can never equal city BI. That means you can never take off from Houston, for instance, and land back in Houston in the same element. And then all strings consist of lowercase and uppercase English letters and the space character. Okay, so those are our constraints. Looking down here, I have our class written up. I have our main, which we'll use to test this, and then our method here, destCity. DestCity, you can see it returns a string, and it takes as its parameter a multi-dimensional list. So this is a list with another list inside of it. and that list inside of it is made up of strings, and it's called paths. Okay, so looking at this up here, I think what would be a really smart thing for us to do is to create two lists here at the beginning, because we know that we have outgoing flights and incoming flights. And I think if we put the outgoing flights all into a list and the incoming flights all into a list, then we can start to deduce, okay, what incoming flights don't have an outgoing flight. And if we can find that incoming flight that does not have an outgoing flight from that same destination, then we know that that is the destination. So, for instance, Sao Paulo here has an incoming flight. It does not leave from anywhere, though. So you can not see Sao Paulo at any of these first elements or the 0th position in these elements. It's not in there. So Sao Paulo would be the answer. Okay, so down here, let's create two lists. Let's create first a list, and these are all going to be lists of string, and this is going to be our outgoing flights, and that's going to be equal new. We could just do linked lists here. Okay, and we're going to start that as blank, and we need a second list as well. This second list is going to hold our incoming flights. Excellent. Okay, and we're going to set that as a new linked list as well. Okay, so looking at this now, we have our outgoing flights and our incoming flights lists. Now we need to generate or input data into both these lists to fill them out. Where do we get that data from? We get that data from our parameter paths up here. So remember, paths is a multi-dimensional list here. So we don't want to grab the whole list here. We want to grab each of these elements in that list. So we want to grab the 0th element, the first element, and the second element. So down here, we need a for loop. We'll just do a for I loop. We're going to initialize this at I equals 0. And we're going to take this up to the length of paths, or the size of paths, sorry, because it is a list. So the size of paths, but not including not including that. This is exclusive. You see we don't have the equal there. And we're just going to do I++. Okay, now in here what we need to do is we need to create another list, and this list will basically hold all of our list of string, and this is going to hold each, and this is going to be the individual elements from path. So from that paths list, we're going to take each of the individual elements. So I'm going to take, just to show you guys, I'm going to take this element, or for example, better example up here, I'm going to take this element, and then I'm going to take this element, and then I'm going to take this element. So you can see I'm going through our list now, and I'm going to take each of those elements. So to get those elements, I need to go paths.get, and we just enter I there because we want the ith element. Now we have that ith element. So we have this right here stored into this variable, individual elements from paths. Now we want to take the two elements of that. So you see there's two elements here. We have our B, which is our outgoing flight, and C, which is our incoming flight. We want to take those two elements and put them into our list up here. So outgoing flights dot, sorry, we can make this a little easier. We could say string outgoing flight equals, you see how this is not plural, this is plural because it's made of many flights. Outgoing flights is going to be assigned the individual elements from paths.get. So this is going to be the first element in that inner array. So in this inner list, we're going to grab B because B is the outgoing flight. C is the incoming flight. So we're going to assign C, which we represent with 1 because it's the second element, but 1 represents the second element in a list or array. And we're going to have string incoming flight. Notice it's not plural. And this is going to be individual elements from paths.get. And this is going to be 1. So now this outgoing flight, so if we're looking at this example right here, B has just been put into our outgoing flight. C has just been put into our incoming flight variable right here. Now we're going to assign these variables just outgoing flight, flights.add outgoing flight. Okay? And then we're going to do incoming flight dot add incoming flight. Oh. Okay. So at this point, we should have after we've gone through this for loop now, we should have all of the outgoing flights in this list up here and all of the incoming flights in this list up here. So the outgoing flights list will consist of B, D, C. The incoming flights list will consist of C, B, and A. Now, the key thing that we need to think about here is which of these outgoing flights, or sorry, incoming flights, so which of these second elements in these things does not have a representative first element as well. So I'll talk you through this. Looking at C, for example, C is an incoming flight, but you can see over here it's also an outgoing flight. B is an incoming flight, but over here you can also see it's an outgoing flight. A, on the other hand, is an incoming flight, but in none of these other first elements over here do you see an A. So we know that A has to be it. So down here, that's going to be the test that we run. Down here, what we're going to do is we're going to do another for loop for I. I is going to be equal to 0. And now the length here that the conditional that we're putting into our for statement here, we can either do outgoing flights dot size or incoming flights dot size because we know they're the same size. They both have the same number of elements. Now, in here is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to take the incoming flights dot get I, and so now we have each of the incoming flights elements. So we have C, we have B, we have A, and we're going to go through each of those and say if outgoing flights dot contains incoming flight. Oh, excuse me, I gotta put this over here. We need to come up with another variable to put this into. String. Oh, we can just call this incoming flight again. Notice because it's outside the scope of this for loop, we can reuse that variable if we want to, as long as it's not confusing. But no, we're just talking about one individual incoming flight here, not all of the flights. So if outgoing flights dot contains incoming flight, and actually we're going to put an exclamation point here because we want to do the opposite of that, which is saying if outgoing flights does not contain incoming flight, then we know we need to return incoming flight, because that's going to be our incoming flight that does not have a match on the outgoing flight. So we're saying outgoing flights cannot contain this incoming flight element. And if that's true, then we're going to return that incoming flight. Else, down here at the end, we're going to return null. Because otherwise we know we don't need to see that. Okay, so looking at this now, we have our solution. We have two lists here that we created at the top, outgoing flights list and an incoming flights list. Then in the first for loop, we went through the greater paths multidimensional list that we have here. We took each single element from that multidimensional list and assigned that to this list here. So we took all these inner lists and we assigned it to this list. Then in this list, we took the two elements, because we know there's only two to each of those lists. We have the outgoing flight and we have the incoming flight, and we added those respectively to their lists that we've created up here. Now in the second for loop, after we've added all of our outgoing flights and incoming flights to these two lists, then we look through the incoming flights array and we say, each of these incoming flights, is it also contained in the outgoing flights array? If it's not also contained in the outgoing flights array, we know that this is the final destination for the user, and thus we can return that as the final destination. Else, we're going to have to return null because there obviously is something wrong in the data here. Okay, so looking down here in the test, for today's assignment, I just wrote up the list because it would kind of take us a while to do this, but I wrote it out very, what would you say, complexly, just because I want you guys to see what's going on here for my data that I'm adding. So here, all I'm doing is initializing a multidimensional array, and then I'm initializing each of the lists that are inside of that multidimensional list. Sorry, not array, multidimensional list. So we have this list, which we've added B and C, and I'm taking that example from example 2. And then D and B we added, and then C and A. And then we add each of those lists to the multidimensional list, and then we tested it. So let's test this and see when we run this. So we have B, C, D, B, C, A. So that's all of the stuff from up here in example 2, B, C, D, B, C, A. And we should get an output of A here. So let's check that we get that. We're going to run this right now. And let's see what we get back. We should get A back, or sorry,